Welcome back, everybody, to the Introduction to Underwater Part 2. As I mentioned in segment 1, this time we were going to talk in depth about the gear that I use to create those amazing underwater portraits. We're going to break them down into two separate segments. We're going to first talk about my camera and my go-to lens, and then we're going to talk about my underwater housing. So first, let's start with the camera and the lens. The camera that I use. This is my Canon 5D Mark IV, and this is my go-to underwater camera body. Now I know what you're thinking. You're probably going to ask me if I have the R5 and if I plan on using the R5 underwater. The answer to that question is yes, I absolutely do. We're just waiting for the housing to be completed. So for now, I'm with my 5D Mark IV, my go-to camera for underwater. I have been a Canon girl always, and I will forever be a Canon girl. So this is my go-to camera. It works amazing in low light settings. If you have the Mark IV, you're very familiar with this. It's not anything new that I have to tell you. Now let's talk about my lens. This is my Canon 11-24. You guys have probably heard me talk about this lens before, and I'm going to talk about it again because I am obsessed with this lens. Now, I know some of you are probably wondering, don't you get some distortion with this lens? Is that something you need to be concerned with? And the answer is both yes and no. So yes, of course, with any wider angle lens, you are going to have a little bit of distortion that you're going to have to be aware of. But to the upside of that, it does offer so much variety with what you can capture in camera because it is a wider angle lens that you don't have to worry about losing your client's gown or really dramatic parts of the image. You don't want to lose that. So you need a wider angle lens. You can always crop in. You can't add space if there's none to begin with. So my 11-24 is the only lens that I use underwater. Could I use maybe the 24-70? Absolutely. But in every underwater scenario, what I have found, whether I'm in the ocean or in the pool, I need that extra space. So the 11-24 is the lens that I use every time I'm underwater. Now let's talk about the underwater housing. So let's talk about the underwater housing kit that I use. As you can see, the brand and the company that I use is Ikelite. Now there are numerous reasons as to why I chose this underwater housing company, which we will go into a little bit more detail when we actually assemble everything together for you to see. But for now, let's just talk about the different pieces and how they all kind of go together. So first we have the actual housing itself, and this is what your main camera body is going in, okay? Now this is specifically made, and you have to remember something very important to remember about underwater housing is that it's made specifically for your body, for your lens, whatever lens you plan on using. It's all custom made to fit your setup. So this fits a Mach 3 and a Mach 4 camera body. Okay, now to my left, this is the dome that is going to connect on front of the housing. Obviously for your lens to be able to fit out, go outside of that housing and you be able to actually capture those images you want to capture. Now, because I use my 11-24, this little piece right here is crucial. If I did not have this, I would not be able to use my 11-24. What this is an extender so that way you have extra room in between the actual dome and the underwater housing itself, because that 11-24 is a beast of a lens and it needs those few extra inches so that lens can fit in there comfortably. Now the last piece here is what's called the zoom sleeve. Now it kind of comes apart, as you can see, in two pieces, but what this does is it actually allows you to zoom your lens, just like it sounds, the zoom sleeve, and it fits right inside. And like I said, we're going to put it all together in just a moment so you can see, but once it's in there and your lens is in there, it allows you access to be able to zoom while you're underwater. Now this little, it's kind of funny looking, but what this is over here, this little thingamajig, is a pressure gauge. So believe it or not, this actually may be one of the most important pieces because you want to make sure that your housing is sealed before you go underwater. Why? Because we don't want any leaks. We don't want our gear to get waterboarded. Yes, that has happened to me before, if you were wondering. So always, always, always you want to make sure that the pressure in your housing is set so that it is sealed and your camera gear is safe. So before we get started putting it together, we're going to do just a quick look at everything. Again, this is the actual housing kit itself where the camera body goes. This is your dome that's going to go on front of your camera body underwater housing kit. If you are using a large lens like an 11 to 24, you will need an extender, okay? And again, these kind of go boom, boom, boom. I'm going to turn them to the side so that you can see. Here, 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 because I need that extra space for that 11 to 24. And don't forget the zoom sleeve. This is what's actually allowing me to go from that 11 to that 24 in any circumstance underwater. I'm still able to zoom while I'm underwater. And then last but not least, definitely not the least important, probably the most important, is your pressure gauge to make sure that everything is sealed before you ever go in the water with your gear. Now, let's get ready to put it together. All right, let's start assembling this underwater housing all together for you to be able to see so that way you understand if you end up getting some Ikelite housing, how to set it up and how to use it properly. So the first thing that I'm going to do, make sure that nothing wobbles first of all. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to unlock the back part of my housing itself. So if you can see, there are metal clasps on 3 sides of this housing. I'm going to unhook those. I know you guys are probably wondering how I do this with nails. Lots and lots of practice. And the back is going to come off just like this, okay? Now, one of my favorite reasons as to why I love the Ikelite underwater housing kits is for this sole purpose right here. So inside the housing itself, there is a little piece that is going to connect to your camera. And if you can see here, I'm going to slide it back in. It is suspending your camera in the housing. So God forbid, but if you were to have a leak, and you were able to catch it quick enough, the water wouldn't even touch your camera. That is one of my all-time favorite things about Ikelite. I love the fact that they suspend your camera in the housing, so it's like double protection for your camera. Not only do you have a pressure gauge to make sure that it's sealed, but even if something was to go wrong, it is still suspended in the housing itself. So let's put it together. So what I am going to do is I'm going to pull this piece out, and on this piece there are directions. So it tells you exactly where the lens, it has a little arrow that is showing you which direction to put this piece in so that way you're not putting it in backwards. So on here, it has a little arrow that's pointing for the lens to go this way. So what that means is my camera is going to sit on it just like this. Now you will have a little screw that you are going to screw this little piece into. It goes right into that screw right at the bottom of your camera body. Now be careful, you don't want to strip anything. So it needs to be snug, but you don't need to keep twisting. Once it's tight, leave it alone. And then we are going to slide it right in there. Doing it backwards is a little tricky. Not used to doing it that way. Boom, slides in just like that. Okay, no movement. It's still not secure because the back is not in there, but it's not going to be sliding around inside this housing even though it's suspended. It is locked into place. Then we're going to put the back of the housing back on, but I wanted to show you what these little doodads were. So this is what's called O-rings, and you will get a few depending on your housing setup, depending on, you know, what lens you're using and the dome and the port, and if you have an extender, you'll have quite a few of them. The way that you store these, just as a little side note, is with every single O-ring, there's going to come a little bit of lubricant. Not only does this actually help your housing seal when you're putting it together, but when you're storing them, you put them in a little plastic bag just like this. I even entitled my bag O-rings. You're going to put a little bit of lubricant on them so that they don't get any dry rot, because they are like a silicone rubber. So, and if you don't take care of them, they will degrade over time. And what you don't want is that happening while you're in the middle of the ocean. So take care of your O-rings, and your O-rings will take care of you. So what we're going to do is we're just going to put a little bit of that lubricant on our finger. Right there, and we are just going to rub it around the entire O-ring, just like that. Just enough. We don't need it to be super slimy. We just need just a little bit of lubrication, which just kind of helps everything seal together. And we're going to go over that O-ring just a couple of times with our fingers. And then we are going to put it on the back of the housing itself. So if you can see, there is a groove right around the acrylic glass case on the back that O-ring is going to fit into. So we're going to put it around just like that. And it should fit firmly, but it shouldn't be like a rubber band snug. So if you can see, that O-ring is now around that little groove there, and that's what's actually sealing the back part of my camera. So I'm going to turn this around. I'm going to put it down on its face. Totally okay to do that, by the way, as long as the dome's not on there. Put it in place, and then we are going to close the clasps on all edges. You hear it click. That's what you want to hear. Boom. Your camera body is in there. Okay, now let's get to where we start to put our dome and our extender port on. Now we also have this little tool here that is going to help us kind of take off the pieces that protect our underwater housing when it's in storage. So it just kind of looks just like a long U shape, if that makes any sense at all. And then we're going to twist this piece here, which all this is doing is protecting anything from getting in our housing while it's in storage. So now you can see the head of my camera through the port right there. Okay. Now at this point in time, we are going to get our next O-ring. This one is significantly smaller. This is going to go right on the outside of the underwater housing kit itself before you put the extended port on there, before you put your dome on there. Now remember, mine's fit for 11 by 20, not 11 by 24, for my 11 to 24 lens. So you may not have this piece, but either way, regardless of if you have this piece or not, let's say you just have the housing and the dome itself. Oop, I dropped one of my O-rings. Then you would still be using an O-ring before you put your dome on, either way. So we're going to do the same process. We're going to get this O-ring. We're going to put a little bit of lubricant on it as well. Just right on there. Go around just a couple of times, because like I said, it doesn't have to be super slimy, just enough to kind of give it a little bit of an oily feel. And it is going to go inside of the groove made for it, right on the outside of this housing. So it's going to be right in the middle there. And that's what's sealing the next piece on your actual underwater housing itself. So we are going to put, for me, it's going to be my extender. Now, these are always good to have on hand, these little screws. That is what's going to screw your extender or your dome, if you do not have this piece, into place. These itty bitty screws, it's always good to have a few of these on hand because stuff gets loose all the time, and it's just a good idea to have those on hand. So we're going to loosen them up. What you don't want is to have these screws tightened in, trying to shove this down on your housing, because then something's going to break. So you want them as loose as they can go without them falling out. And then you are going to, you'll see on your housing, there is little grooves on the side. I don't know if you can see that or not, where those screws are supposed to go. There's 3 screws on here, and they're going to slide down just like this. It doesn't really make a clicking sound, but you can kind of feel with your hands, it'll kind of smush down on top of that other piece. So then we're going to tighten those screws. But again, we're not over tightening. We're tightening to where they're firm, and then we stop. We don't want to strip anything. But make sure that all three are tight. Okay, last one. Perfect. Now, guys, remember, because I'm using my 11-24 and we have this extender, now is the time to put the zoom sleeve in. Now, it would be a good idea for you to go ahead and take your camera lens cap off, your body cap, I should say, off. So let's get that out of there. Always make sure that your camera is off before you do this, because I have done this numerous times where I accidentally left my camera on, and of course that messes up my brain's going dead. Either way, it'll mess up your camera if you do not make sure that your camera is off. You guys know my brain it'll come and go. So we're going to put this down in there, the zoom sleeve. Now, if you can see, there's little ridges, and this is actually what's like a turned gear, like it's almost like a gear in there that's helping you zoom your lens. So we're going to drop this in there just like that. We're going to use that same key that helped us take the protective covering off of the housing to lock this zoom sleeve in. Okay, so we're just screwing that around in there till it gets tight. We're not overstripping anything. Make sure it's tight. There we go, firm. Perfect. Now we're going to take the bottom of the lens cap off. I'm going to line that up there. So it should be fairly snug when you're putting your lens in, especially with that zoom sleeve. There should not be a lot of wobbling around with your lens whatsoever. So we're going to put that down. Did you hear that? And then we're going to wait for the click. I don't know if you could hear the click, but it was right there. Once it clicks, you should be able to test here. This is your zoom knob on the side. Yep. And as long as it's gripping and moving like this with a little bit of traction to it, not moving freely, not rolling too easily, then you know you've put it in the right place. Now we're going to take our lens cap off. We're going to set that to the side. I'm a little type A. I like to kind of put all of my caps together so that I don't lose them, because I am notorious for losing stuff. So I'm going to keep those together there. And then we are going to put the dome on. Let's get the sleeve off of the dome itself. And again, this is just for protecting, make sure that you don't scratch anything. Mine gets dusty super quickly, so I always like to give it a good clean before and after every session. So ignore the dust. We're not going to do the cleaning process this time around. Okay, so I'm going to use another O-ring, because remember, with every single piece, there's going to be an O-ring that seals the next piece on there. Now again, if you do not have like an 11-24 or something that requires the extender, then you will not necessarily need to have this many O-rings. But because I have such a wide angle lens and I needed that extender, I use quite a few O-rings. So this will be the last O-ring that we put on, okay? It's gonna go around your lens. It's gonna go down, over, right into that little groove on that port, on the extender port. And then we are going to be able to loosen up. You see they have the same 3 screws on the dome that was on the extender. So there's going to be 3 grooves for these screws to fit in on this extender port, just like there was for the extender to go onto the actual housing itself. So we're going to put that on right here. And you won't necessarily hear a snap, but you're going to feel it kind of slide on, and it should be fairly firm in place. If anything is wiggling or moving around too easily, something was not assembled right, and you need to like work backwards to make sure you didn't miss any O-rings. So let's tighten up those screws. And again, we are not over tightening, just to where it's firm. Sturdy, not over stripping. And then we're going to flip it over. Voila, we have assembled the entire thing. It's pretty heavy. So what's funny about the housing is it's very heavy out of water, but in the water, if you saw the first segment of the introduction to underwater, you kind of heard me talk about this a little bit. It's heavy out of the water, but in the water, it actually floats. And there's a reason for that. Say you are in the ocean and something happens and you let go of your housing, it's going to float back up to the surface. And that's obviously so that you don't lose thousands of dollars, because if it sank to the bottom of the ocean and you're in several hundred feet of deep ocean, you would not be able to retrieve your camera gear. So the last thing that we are going to do is we are going to pressure gauge this gear. So right here on the side is where your pressure gauge is going to go. So there's a little chain that is connected to it, okay? If this chain is broken, that means that this port right here to check your pressure has been compromised and the housing would need to be repaired. So this chain right here should not be broken from this pressure gauge hole that's on the side of the housing. There is a little button that you will push on the side. I don't know if you heard that click, but it'll pop right out. And as you can see in my hand, that little piece right there is what's actually going. You're going to put that back in once everything has been checked and sealed, pressure checked, all of that. You're going to put that right back into that hole, push it down. Now, this right here, our pressure gauge, is going to fit right into that hole, right there. You're going to push it until you hear it click. Boop. Now I know you heard that one click. And how you check the pressure is you are going to simply pump the pressure gauge, and it'll take a couple of minutes. And let me set this on the side here. And how you'll know if you have a leak is that the pressure will never build in your housing. It'll never build. You may actually be able to hear a leak if you start pressure using your hand to pump this and you hear a sss. That's how you know you have a leak. So let's just keep pumping here. And I'm only going to get it to a few pounds of pressure here just to kind of show you what I mean, so that we know that it's sealed. And it'll take a minute for that air to kind of fill in there. I mean, depending on the depth of the water that you're going in would also depend on where your pressure gauge needs to go. So that's a whole nother topic that we could talk about for another 30 minutes. But for the sake of the timing of this video, just be mindful of the depth of the water that you're going in and make sure that your housing can handle that pressure. Okay, so I am just a little in between 5 to 10 pounds of pressure there. I'm waiting to see if that needle on the pressure gauge is moving at all. If it's moving down, that means that we have a leak. And as of right now, we have no movement whatsoever, so we are good to go. We are going to push this button back on the side to release the pressure hose. And I know what you're wondering. You're wondering, as soon as I press this button, is it going to mess up the pressure gauge or in the housing at all? It will not, because there is an interior seal that once you press this button, it will automatically close the seal to the housing itself. So we put this right back in, this little black cover to this pressure hose on the side of the housing. I want you to hear the click. Boom, click. It is ready to go. Now, keep this in mind. After you have done your pressure check, you will not be able to open your housing at all. You will have to use this gun to release the pressure before you can pop the lid open, because it's literally creating a suction inside of there, so that way nothing obviously gets in or goes out. So if you think that you're going to be able to seal it and then you are going to be able to pop it open to adjust something in between, maybe being in the pool or in the ocean, you're back on the boat and you want to kind of look through your camera, that's not going to happen. You're going to have to depressurize your camera before you can take the back of this off. Now, the next thing that we're going to talk about, and I'm going to show you, is how easily accessible the settings are. So we're going to do that right now next. Okay, so we've gone over the gear, we've gone over the camera, the lens that I use, we have assembled the entire system. Now I want to show you the other favorite thing, and why I chose Ikelite as my underwater housing system is simply because of how accessible all of your settings for your camera are. So first of all, if you're not super familiar, if you're just picking up photography or if you're just picking up underwater photography, the beautiful thing about this is that your buttons back here all have titles to them. So it's already telling you pretty much where everything is, which I love. But just so I can kind of walk you through it, your on-off button is going to be right here. And just for the sake of it, I'm gonna kind of tilt it up here. I'm resting it on the dome cover right here. I don't know if you can see. Anytime you see me setting my gear kind of on its side, it's resting right here. I'm not putting it on the actual dome itself. So your on and off is right here. So you see how everything pops up right there. So you can see it clearly, perfectly through that acrylic glass cover back there. I love that. You've got your playback button, your zoom button. You have your focal points right here. You can scroll to look through images here. So just as an example, we're going to press the play button so that we can see. And to go through your images here, you're going to use the scroll button. I don't know if you can see it scrolling through the images there, but you can use that right there. And that way you can kind of have a good look. You can work with your clients. You can show them the back of the camera. That way you can perfect each image the next time you go underwater. So that is all super easily accessible, and that is one of the biggest things that I love. Now, if you want to change from camera to video, that is this knob right up here, which again, everything's listed. So there's not really too much guesswork, and that's what I love about it, because like I said, if you're just starting out, this kind of takes out a lot of the guesswork for you, which a lot of other underwater housings don't do, which again is one of the reasons why I chose Ikelite. Now, on top is going to be your ISO, your white balance. Now, this is not labeled, and this is where it's going to come down to you kind of understanding and knowing your camera. So study your camera, know those buttons on top where these are not listed. That way you don't have any guesswork left to worry about. Now, when it comes to actual settings and what settings you should be on when you're photographing underwater, that is going to be in segment 3 of the introduction to underwater. But I did want to at least show you how the accessibility of the settings were for this specific housing, so that way you could see there's really not a lot of guesswork there, and you can reach them very quickly. So imagine, if you will, because a lot of people start photographing just in automatic. You know, they're not leaving anything to the imagination. But when you start shooting in manual, you have to be able to access your ISO, your aperture, your shutter speed, all of those things you need to be able to reach and get to very quickly. Because if you're like me and you use ambient light, a cloud could come over and you need to be able to adjust your settings very quickly. So this takes all of the guesswork out of it for you, because you know where everything is right out of the bat, like right off the bat, right out of the gate. No guesswork. So now that you have seen the back of that and you kind of see how easily accessible everything is, all we're going to do is depressurize. We're going to take this out, and then we are going to wrap this segment up and prepare you for segment 3, which is going to be all about how you know what settings you should be shooting, or what your settings should be on for shooting underwater. So again, and I remembered what it was. Make sure that your camera is off, because otherwise it'll cause sensor issues with your camera. Now, the R5 has this lovely little curtain that closes when your camera lens cap is off, which I love. But for the Mach 4, Mach 3, the older models, they don't have that. So make sure that your camera is off before you try to depressurize and deconstruct your housing right out of the gate. So I have turned my camera off. I'm going to flip it back on its side, because remember, this is where that pressure gauge is going to go. I'm going to push that button to get that little stopper out. We're going to put this in here again. You're going to hear it click, boop, click, and then you're going to release. Can you hear it? You're going to hear it releasing all that pressure. And once it's back down to 0, which we have now gotten to, we're going to push that button again. Get rid of the pressure gauge. Make sure you put that stopper back into the pressure gauge hole right there. Heard it click. We're going to put it down here. And remember, because it's resting, it's not resting on the actual dome face itself. It's resting on the protective cover on top of that dome. You don't ever want to damage the dome or scratch that, because then that'll show up. It's almost like scratching a lens. You would have that in every image. Then we're going to release here. And then we have the back off. Voila! So that, now that you guys have seen how to put everything together, I hope that that will help you in your underwater journey. And I am so excited to be on this journey with you, and I cannot wait to get back to you with part 3. So part 3 is going to be all about knowing what settings you should be on. Just a quick little note too, I don't know if you see these handles here. If you are like me, and I've gone over this numerous times, I photograph with ambient light, but on the few occasions that I do need strobes, your strobes actually connect here. I don't know if you can see me slide those little silver buttons back and forth, but your strobes connect down through here, and there is a hot shoe connector inside of the housing that will connect your strobes all together. Now you guys know my reasoning behind why I photograph ambient. I actually prefer it that way, not only because the lights are very cumbersome, but I like having that very real, natural look to my underwater photographs. I like seeing the ripples. I like seeing kind of those, to me, that's what makes it, that you're photographing underwater. That's what makes it so authentic. So I don't use strobes very often. And if I do, it's normally in deep ocean water where it's very, very dark. But this is where your strobes would actually connect, just as a little FYI. So again, make sure that your camera is off. And then when you go to deconstruct, you are actually not going to start by taking the back of the camera body, the housing off first. You're actually going to work in reverse by removing the dome, then the port, and then you are going to take your camera body out. And that is how you deconstruct your underwater housing. Until next time, guys, have fun exploring and growing in your underwater career, and we will see you soon for part 3.